Okay, has this started yet? Always takes a little while for YouTube to kick in. Okay, maybe it's just the preview that's not working. Can anyone in the chat confirm whether they can see me? There he is. Okay, sounds like it. Is that W Boomans? Can you see me, or is it just the chat you can see? Yes, you can see me. Okay, Stuart XRP, thank you very much. I think it's just a problem with YouTube that the preview is not showing, so I can't actually tell what you are seeing. So, which is a little bit frustrating. But anyway, thank you very much for bearing with me, and thank you for tuning in. So yes, I've been away on holiday for the past few weeks, hence there wasn't a show for the past 2 weeks. I was going to try and do something whilst I was away, but wasn't really enough bandwidth to stream anything live. And I did think about, I was in my camper van, so I did think about sitting in my van and channeling my Logic DM and doing a video from there. But in the end, I decided to try and relax a bit. Well, maybe relax might be a different word for different people. I actually spent quite a bit of time coding, sort of way of relaxing, actually, whilst I was sat in the field, working on a new cryptocurrency trading bot, which unfortunately, due to a bug, lost a fair amount of money at the start, but got it going again. But unfortunately, the market moved quite a bit over the intervening couple of weeks, and alas, I don't know if it's going to actually be profitable running it in the long term. But it was an interesting exercise, working against an API of a different exchange than the XRP's built-in distributed exchange, which is the main one I've used previously for writing the trading bots I write. So anyway, but yes, that's what I've been up to for the past 2 weeks. And on to today's show. I decided to pick the topic of what's the difference between payment and settlement. I was going to talk about the exchange, the decentralized exchange built into the XRP ledger, but I think I'll leave that for another week when I've got a bit more time to prepare. So this particular talk is probably going to be a little shorter, and well, it depends. Sometimes I say that and we end up talking quite a bit. And I haven't got any slides or anything prepared. But really what I wanted to talk about was, what is the difference between payment and settlement? Now, this might seem like a bit of a odd topic when talking about cryptocurrency, but actually, funnily enough, actually on Twitter, just as I said this, somebody popped up. Let's see, I need to sign in here, but somebody popped up here and said, so Georgion TGXRP said, in crypto space, payment is settlement, rocket. And that kind of really that's partly key to this, really. So what is the difference between payment and settlement, and what does it mean? Why does that relate to cryptocurrency? Why does it relate specifically to XRP, and what Ripple, for example, are doing? A lot of people say, well, so what about cryptocurrency? Well, Visa's fast. I can pay with Visa instantly. Now, that may be how it appears to you as a person that is paying. You swipe your card, enter your PIN, sign, contactless, whatever it might be, and as far as you're concerned, the payment's gone instantly. You will see possibly in your credit card app or in your bank account, whatever, that the money is gone instantly. And as far as you're concerned, you have paid the merchant straight away. And you have paid them as far as you're concerned. However, anybody who's actually received payment, anybody who's set up a business or run a business and received credit card payment will know that that's not actually the case. They don't actually receive the money straight away. So if they use a intermediary company like Stripe, for example. Now, Stripe make it really super easy to set up and take credit card payments. So if you want to set up a website selling widgets, whatever, maybe you hand make puppets, for example. You hand make puppets, you want to sell them online, you want to take payment. People pay you, you send them a puppet. No idea why I picked puppets. First thing that came to my mind. You can use Stripe and somebody can pay you very easily, but you won't actually receive the payment for another probably about 7 to 10 days with Stripe. It doesn't show up in your account for another 7 to 10 days. So the person paying you has paid, but you don't get the money for another 7 to 10 days. Now, depending upon your business, that might be an issue. That might be a problem that it takes 7 to 10 days because you can't then spend that money. You can't buy more raw materials. You can't pay whatever overheads you might have for your website, for your business, your premises, whatever. Even if you have a direct merchant account with your bank, so you don't use an intermediary like Stripe, but you have a direct merchant account with your bank that allows you to accept credit card payments. Maybe you're even a shop and they give you one of the little terminals that you can put a card into or swipe a card in and take payments. You still will not receive the payment for 3 days. Most settlement is what they call T+3. So it's 3 days, T+2 or T+3. 2 or 3 days from the time that the payment is made and when you actually receive it. So Tom's just asked, in your example, you, the puppet maker, is in the UK. Yes, in my example, the puppet maker is in the UK, but I think it's fairly common worldwide, I think, with Visa, MasterCard, these credit card processing companies, payment processing companies, that it will still take 2 to 3 days. So Tom asks, what if you're in South Africa and I'm in Germany? If you're in South Africa and I'm in Germany, still it's the same. It'll still be 2 to 3 days, may even be a bit longer. But the point being is it's not instant, right? The person paying believes it is instant. That is payment. So when the payment is instant. The settlement is what happens when the merchant receives the actual money. Because with Visa, it's actually quite a complicated flow. Maybe I should have tried to find a diagram that shows it. Let me just have a quick look here and see if I can find. Oh, thank you, Google. Yes. I agree. Clearing process. Right, okay, here we go. So this is just the first example I've clicked on, but hopefully there's a diagram here that shows what happens. And if I can zoom in on this a bit. So here we go. So the credit card, number one, the credit card holder presents a Visa card to pay for purchases to the merchant. The merchant swipes the card or takes the details of the card, enters the transaction amount and authorization request into their terminal. Electronically sends the authorization to VisaNet, that's Visa's network. Visa pass it on to the request onto the card issuer, because remember, your card might say Visa on it, but it might be issued by your bank. So I've got a Visa card that is issued by NatWest Bank or by Lloyds Bank or by Chase Manhattan or MBNA or whoever it might be. The card issuer issues a response. VisaNet forwards the authorization on to the acquirer. Basically, it's a long process, right? So that's just a payment process. But actually, the settlement, the clearing and settlement, is then a further process. So the merchant deposits the transaction receipt with the acquirer. The acquirer credits the merchant account electronically, Visa for settlement. settlement happens within VisaNet to the card issuer, and then finally the card holder receives a statement. So all of this, I'm not going to go into the exact detail of it, but it takes a number of days to go through. I'm not sure if they detail the full details here in it, but it takes a number of days, right? And so although it appears instant to you, the merchant won't receive the payment for another few days. Some people describe it as payment is what happens when you make the payment with your credit card. Settlement is what happens is when you pay your credit card bill 30 days later, up to 30 days later. So you could actually take settlement as being 30 days. Now your bank will pass the details on to the merchant before then, the payment on to the merchant before then. But still, it takes a while. So Owen, hi, good to see you live. Yes, thank you. Good to be back again for a holiday, back on live. And Tom, sold your soul to Google. Yes, I use a different browser for this, so you don't have all my random browser history, and I can keep bookmarks specifically for this show. But it means that it comes up with random updates and stuff now and then. So, yeah, so payment is I am going to send you some money. Settlement is you have received the money, right? And those two things can happen in different time frames. Payment can be instant, settlement can take a while. Now, when we talk about Ripple's use case for XRP and what they're trying to do with cross-border payments, it gets even more complicated. Because, so the example that Tom had of South Africa and Germany, you're trying to make a payment from South African Rand to euros in Germany. The payment might go from your bank in South Africa maybe to a larger bank in South Africa that has a relationship with a bank in Germany that takes the payment and then passes it down possibly to a smaller bank in Germany, then finally to your bank. So what's called the correspondent banking system. And the more esoteric the route, the more likelihood that there's multiple hops in the way. If you were trying to sell Brazilian lira to Thai baht, then maybe it might go through a bank in the US and it might go via US dollars at one point in that. And it kind of relays from one bank to another bank. And because you can't physically, so the payment will go through and it'll say, okay, we have made the payment, right? And that might go through fairly quickly. Even with Swift, okay, Swift is not actually that swift, but they might get the payment through. At some point, the bank in South Africa has to actually settle that payment with the bank in Germany. So how are they going to do that? They've got to physically get some amount of value from South Africa to Germany. So they're going to literally take some South African Rand, put it in a plane and send it to Germany, right? Or put it on a truck or whatever, a boat, send it to Germany, right? That's going to take some time. So they pre-fund the accounts, and this is what's called the Nostro-Vostro system, in which a bank will hold an account on behalf of the other bank with it, and will hold some of its funds, and it will then just move those funds over. Those funds have already been deposited, and they'd say, okay, that payment has been made, we just move that over. That ends up tying up a lot of capital. Trillions of US dollars are tied up, quadrillions, I think, even are tied up around the world on Nostro and Vostro accounts. So Darren Corrine asks, does Swift's new GPI product only improve the payment side, or does it improve settlement times as well? I believe it is only payment. I could be wrong, but I will double check. But I believe it is only payment. So it is a faster method of payment, but the banks still need to do the settlement, and they do that behind the scenes separately with these Nostro-Vostro accounts. Now, it might be the case that the South African bank sends some funds to Germany, and a day later, the German bank sends some funds to South Africa, and those two can cancel each other out. Or maybe if 100 goes one way and 90 goes the other way, then the balance is only 10, right? So they can do what's called netting, in which they look at all the flows that have gone one way, all the flows that have gone the other way, take one away from the other and go, okay, well, we're even, let's call it quits, right? Or this is the difference, we need to settle the difference. But still, That needs to happen. So they need to have some funds allocated in order to do the settlement. So where does XRP come into this, and what is Ripple doing with it as an example? So you might have heard that Ripple have two products, Xcurrent. Well, they've got several products, but the two in this case we talk about, Xcurrent and Xrapid. Xcurrent is predominantly a payment mechanism. It is just a faster way for the payment to go through. Swift's payment mechanism is from the 1960s, 1950s, quite old. It's unidirectional. You don't know, you can send a message one way, but you never get a receipt back. So you don't actually know that it's happened until it's finally happened. If a payment fails, you don't know that it's failed until sometime later. So Ripple's Xcurrent already improves upon that process by allowing bidirectional communication so that you know exactly that the payment has gone through the second it has gone through. So it's much faster, it's much more reliable. It can also carry things like know your customer and anti-money laundering metadata with it. So it can send all the data about the payee and the recipient at the same time, right? That's Xcurrent. But it still then requires, in most cases, because most banks, if they're using Xcurrent, will use it with fiat currencies, they will still then use their existing Nostro and Vostro accounts to do the settlement. Xrapid then brings into the equation a digital asset, XRP. Now, it could use any digital asset, and David Schwartz has said they did have a prototype of it using Bitcoin, for example, but the fees in Bitcoin and the speed of Bitcoin meant that it wasn't as suitable for the task as XRP, because XRP's fees are a lot smaller. XRP much faster at doing this transfer. So we get back to, remember I said that at some point the settlement needs to happen and the bank needs to physically transport some value, because how else fiat currency, you need some banknotes, you need some coins, you need a lump of precious metal, whatever it is you're going to transfer. You need to get that value somehow from one side to the other. Well, digital assets have value in themselves. So Bitcoin, XRP, Ethereum, they have value. At the moment, what is XRP? 29 cents, something like that, whatever it is. I can't remember what it is today. I agree it's 29 cents. You agree it's 29 cents. I can give it to somebody else. They can sell it for 29 cents or whatever the equivalent is in their local currency. But that XRP has value in and of itself, right? So I can send some XRP or some Bitcoin or some Ethereum, Monero, whatever it might be, from one side of the planet to the other side. And that's settled. That's a settled payment. If I send it to you, that's it. You've got it. You can now use it. So the idea behind Xrapid is to buy XRP on the fly from exchanges. So I want to pay, I have US dollars and I want to make a payment to whatever Thai baht. I use my US dollars to buy XRP. I send the XRP to Thailand. The XRP is then sold for Thai baht at that end, and then the Thai baht transferred to the end. So you're at 32 cents. Okay, I'm probably thinking 29 euro cents at the moment. It's probably what I'm thinking. But anyway, it's that's the idea behind using a digital asset such as XRP. So XRP allows the settlement to happen instantly because cryptocurrencies themselves are a digital asset. They have value. There's no counterparty. So when we talk about counterparty in banking, we talk about somebody you need as part of the other half of a transaction, right? There's no counterparty to XRP. If I send you the XRP, you've got it. There's nothing that can stop you from spending that XRP, from cashing it into some other form of value that might be, more readily spendable for you, right? So Stuart asks, how long does Xrapid take to implement into a current system? As in, how long does it take a bank to add Xrapid? I don't know. I don't know that. I have heard David Schwartz say that once they've got Xcurrent going, then adding Xrapid is kind of a case of flicking a switch. It might be a little more complicated than that because it depends upon what exchanges there are at each end. Because Xrapid draws from pools of liquidity of local exchanges. So you will need an exchange that has the currency pair that you are looking for in the source and the destination ends. And that's one of the bits that is taking the time with XRapid at the moment, is that they've kind of got this chicken and egg problem that unless there are the exchanges there with the XRP fiat pairs, then they can't really go ahead and implement XRapid, because there's nothing at the other end to, you know, turn that XRP into, say, Thai baht. So they need the exchanges there, but then the exchanges need the volume of the transactions. So that's why the original idea of using it with banks, great, but they've now said, okay, well, let's use it with smaller remittance providers. Let's get them to do it for smaller payments first and then slowly build up. So it's still going to happen, I think. It's just taking a little while longer than expected to build up the liquidity that's going on. And there was recently a comment, I think it was in David Schwartz's Ask Me Anything recently, in which he talked about being able to simultaneously draw from multiple pools at the same time. And so that XRapid will be able to say, okay, well, this exchange, you know, I need whatever, 50,000 XRP. Well, this exchange has got 20,000 and this exchange has got 30,000. So by 20,000 from here, 30,000 from here, join them together, send 50,000 to the other end, and it might sell 10,000 on one exchange and 40,000 on another. So Tom's asking, so Ripple needs market makers. Yes, Ripple does need market makers. Ripple needs market makers, and they need exchanges as well, to provide the ability for somebody to buy and sell the XRP at each end. I'm saying exchanges, it could be other institutions. You could have dedicated market makers that don't necessarily operate as exchanges. One of the big things that have been said are talking about the SBI Group in Japan, and that they're going to be an XRapid connector with their virtual currency exchange. And that's a big exchange, because that's an exchange that's built into people's bank accounts, I believe, or accessible directly from the bank account. So anybody with a bank account with one of the, whatever it is, 30, 50, 60, I can't remember, banks in Japan will be able to use that exchange. And I think transfer funds instantly from their bank account, you know, it will be a fairly seamless thing. And then if they use that for liquidity for XRapid, then that's a very big pool that they can use. So that's a bit about talking about payment and settlement. Hopefully that's a little clearer. A lot of people, so another way of possibly illustrating this, or an argument that might sort of help illustrate this, is quite often I see on Twitter people say, well, XRP is not actually necessary, people can just use the protocol. What they mean by that, it's a bit of a canned phrase that somebody's picked up somewhere and people just keep repeating because it doesn't really mean anything of its own. But what they're trying to say is that Ripple's strategy will work with Xcurrent but doesn't need XRapid. And what they're saying is that Xcurrent is being implemented by a lot of banks. I think Ripple have said coming up for 200 banks, 200 partners they've got it working with, between 100 and 200. I can't remember the exact figure at the moment. I think they passed 100 and they said they're going to make a next announcement when they get to 200. So somewhere between the two, banks are using Xcurrent. And for instance, Santander publicly released that app that they can use between, I think it's about 4 different countries. I can't remember, France, Poland, UK and Belgium, maybe something like that, for doing payments directly from a mobile phone using Xcurrent. And people are saying, well, if you can use that, then why do you need XRP? Well, the reason being is because that is still just doing the payment side, but not the settlement. Now that might be possible, that might be fine if you're doing payment between the same bank in different countries, Santander in the UK and Santander in France. But actually the reality is, although they might come under the same name, the chances are they are completely separate entities. They'll be separate legal entities, they'll have separate banking licenses, separate bank accounts, and even different branches of the same bank in different countries still operate kind of as though they're separate banks, because they still have to do settlement between each other in order to satisfy their own legal obligations within their country. You know, one bank can't just get to the end of the year and say, well, hey, well, we're owed all this money from these people over here, but it is really... They have to actually have a formal accounting arrangement for that. So a question was made to Ashish Birla asking, when XRP is live, wouldn't the price crash when large XRP is purchased or sold for transactions? He replied, not when transactions are made every second. Yeah, so this is coming back to the idea about the amount of volume that could be carried by XRapid given the current exchanges. You can't go and make a $1 million payment now by sourcing liquidity from Bitstamp, say. There's just not enough there yet. But it does fill up quite rapidly. So you might not be able to make $1 million payment, but you might be able to make $1,000 payments over the space of a few days. That might be fine. So, but it's, like I said, a chicken and egg kind of problem, and they've got to slowly build up the volume. Calvin Schultz asks thoughts about on-ledger transactions versus payment channels, and Coils plan to use this for data transfer, penny switching. Do you think there's a good pairing, or might there be a better way? So within XRP and the XRP ledger, you have the main public transactions that are the XRP that we transfer, to and from each other with a payment transaction on the ledger. And then there's also payment channels, which open a channel between two people, which are kind of an agreement that, okay, we're going to do some transactions, and they then happen effectively off the main ledger and then are settled afterwards. A little bit like Bitcoin's Lightning Network, not quite. But the great thing with those is you can do really, really, really tiny transactions and you don't pay the transaction fee. Even though XRP's transaction fee is, a thousandth of a cent, when you're trying to do lots and lots of payments of a thousandth of a cent, then obviously the fees do matter. So what Coil are looking to do is use payment channels for really, really small payments. So for instance, this stream. Imagine if there was a commercial streaming provider that wasn't YouTube that could either they pay me or I pay them for the service, depending upon which way it's going, for every second of this broadcast. And every second, a thousandth of a cent goes through, or maybe each of you, your browsers, are paying this service a thousandth of a cent for every second, and then it pays me or whatever. That'd be great. But those tiny little payments, that's what Coil's working on, using payment channels. So, but that's separate to what we're talking about, I suppose, really with like XRapid and that side of things, because those are larger payments. But you could possibly say that the payment channels are payment, and then when you actually close the channel, that's settlement. That might be one way of thinking about it, with that sort of thing, because until it's settled, it doesn't show up on the public ledger. Now, another question that comes up on Twitter a lot is that people say, for example, why do you need XRP? Why doesn't a bank just create its own cryptocurrency? And at first that sounds like a reasonable thing. Why would they want to pay to buy XRP from Ripple when they could just make their own? Right? I mean, they could even take the source code of the Ripple network, it's publicly available, and create their own token. That's perfectly doable. Or they could issue an IOU on the XRP ledger and do it that way. So why do they need XRP? Why do they need a public? Well, the point being is XRP is a public token. So it has a public agreed value. The value that I think it is here in the UK, it's the same value in South Africa and New Zealand, in wherever, Russia, relative to their local currency. But one XRP is still one XRP no matter where it is, right? And if a bank developed its own blockchain, so Bank A in the UK develops its own blockchain, it wants to make a payment to Bank B in the US. What does it do? Well, first of all, there's some actual interoperability plumbing problem of, I've got a token A and I need to send it to you, and you deal with token B. Well, that's partly what ILP, the Interledger Protocol, is going to solve. But still, there's this issue of what do they do with it? So Bank A makes a whole load of payments to Bank B. Bank B then end up with a whole bunch of Bank A's token. Or do they trust that token or not? I mean, they didn't create it. the other bank created it? Do they trust the other bank? Okay, now they want to send some payment to Bank C. Well, does Bank B tell Bank C to use Bank B's token, or do we use Bank C's token? Whose token do we use? And does that mean for every bank we need a token? And do we need an agreement between every single bank? You end up with this thing where you need, whatever it is, n squared connections between every single bank in order to get this full mesh of connections, and they then all have to have agreements as to, okay, whose token are we going to use, how much do we value it, if it's not traded publicly, what's it worth? Well, Bank A could say, well, this token's worth $1, and Bank B could say, well, we don't think so, we think it's worth 50 cents, or we think it's worth $2. How do you come to an agreement? If it's not public, there's no real agreement on. So what you end up effectively doing is replicating what we talked about at the start, which is this Nostro-Vostro system, in which you end up holding funds from another bank. They're just digital funds, but you end up holding the other funds, bank tokens from the bank. Now, what if there's a problem? What if there's a security alert or some sort of double spend? If you're some small country in the middle of nowhere, if you're using, say, a proof of work system, you need to get enough people incentivized to protect your network. So you need enough miners. Well, are you and I going to mine the token from the National Bank of, Elbonia? Who knows, right? Possibly not. And if not, then does that mean it could be susceptible to a double spend, a 51% attack and double spends? Well, yes. So what happens with the bank in Germany that's holding all these tokens on behalf of this other bank in Elbonia, and they suddenly become worthless because of some security incident? So really, banks creating their own blockchain doesn't really solve the problem of interoperability between banks, because they have to agree on a common value. And so to do that, they're probably going to need some common reference point, which is probably going to be a public token. So they might as well just use a public token in the first place, rather than convert from Bank A's token to Bitcoin to Bank B's token, or Bank A's token to XRP to Bank B's token. They might as well just use the public token in the first place. Now, Swift actually tried to do an implementation of blockchain, and they tried to do a sort of proof of concept internally within Swift. And they did it without using a public token. I don't know whether they just used, an equivalent of fiat currency, but they said they couldn't get it to work in the end. It just didn't seem to make any sense. It just didn't seem to work because there wasn't the public token there. And so really, that is what XRP's role is being that public token. It's often been described a bit like the internet. You have TCP/IP, which is the common protocol on the internet, which means it doesn't matter. I mean, in the early days of networks, you had different networks from different vendors. And if you had a network from Sun Microsystems, that was not able to talk to a network from Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC, for example, until TCP/IP came along, in which they both started to implement the same common standard. So you could then send some data from a Sun workstation to a DEC workstation. Before then, you couldn't do that. And then TCP/IP, because it's a public network, it started to grow and grow. And some may remember the early days of, especially in the US, Prodigy, CompuServe, AOL. There were these walled gardens of information, and they slowly started to give way to the public internet on the basis of it doesn't matter whether I'm connected via TalkTalk in the UK, Comcast in the US, Rogers in wherever, Canada. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether I'm connected via fiber optic, via Wi-Fi, via a satellite phone. The applications don't care. The data will still get through from one end to another. And that's what you have with XRP. It doesn't matter which bank is communicating with which bank. They have a common public standard for value that they can use. So Viking Twiz asks, what about central bank issued tokens, pound, dollar? So I'm guessing you're talking about the concept of what's called stable coins, in which you have a token that is pegged to a particular fiat currency. So you say, so Tether is an example. So one Tether is equivalent to $1 US, and that's what it stays at. Well, yeah, that's fine, but you've still got to convert that $1 to one to how many South African rands. So you still have to have a, an exchange rate, and you've got to determine what that exchange rate is, and what happens if, for example, Tether. What happens if they suddenly go bust? What happens if, for example, there's some, I don't know, accountancy impropriety behind Tether, and it's deemed that Tether's then worthless. So what happens? It all just disappears. The value goes. So stable coins, it's an interesting example, but the point being is you tie it to one country's version of stable. So what, I can't remember within Venezuela at the moment what the what's it called, Petrocoin, what that's connected to. But if that's connected to the Venezuelan currency, the Venezuelan currency goes down the pan, then what happens to that stable coin? Does its value go down the pan as well? Well, you've not really solved anything, have you? So there was a what was it called? The Bancor, I believe, which was a theoretical currency that was a basket of a number of currencies from different countries. So the idea was one Bancor was, a number of euro cents, number of dollars, a number of pounds, a number of Swiss francs, whatever, kind of combined together. And the idea was if one failed, then you kind of had a bit of resilience because the others should still be okay. But again, that never kind of really took off. Ironically, there was a cryptocurrency called the Bancor as well, which also seemed to fail. So maybe it's just an unfortunate naming. But yeah, that's trying to tie it to one particular currency is problematic. At first it seems like a good idea and it simplifies things, but actually you get to this question of, well, who values it? And really, by having something on a public market, it means that, well, we determine the value between us, and so no one sort of country has as much influence on it. So Calvin talking about ILP, you can handle the exchange between tokens and currencies. You can route value between the network. Pretty cool. Yeah. So you can with ILP you can route cryptocurrencies between different networks. So Vitsa has been working on something for Tipbot, which should allow the XRP Tipbot for somebody to tip in some completely random currency and it's use ILP to translate it. But somewhere you have a gateway, and that gateway must accept one cryptocurrency and dole out the other one. So it becomes effectively this little mini Nostro Vostro account on route, which it solves some problems. Again, it can create some others. It's certainly better than where we are now. It's milliseconds rather than days to make payments, and it's much smaller providers and it's automatic routing. So if I send from A to B, it will find which route is the most cost-effective route, and different market makers can be sat there, and you have competition there to get things to go through. So Crypto Hippie, with banks trying to form one solution, you get a spaghetti jumble of chaotic fighting or agreeing banks about usage, and they wouldn't ever be able to achieve agreement. Exactly. Why would one bank trust another bank? Again, another big thing is people refer to the banks as some big monolithic thing. They're not. There's lots of banks around the world. There's small banks, there's big banks, there's banks some people might think are good, and banks that some people might think are evil. But they're not one thing. And trying to get a bank in one country to agree to dealing with a bank in another country, at the very least, requires a document and a signature before something can go ahead. And as soon as you start having that, it's a case of, well, what goes in the document? Okay, if we scratch your back, are you going to scratch ours? What services are we providing? Is this fair? It suddenly just opens up a whole can of worms. Whereas if you say, okay, I have a connector to XRP, you have connected to XRP, then you only have to deal with one half of the deal, right? It's just a case of, I get my dollars to XRP, here's XRP, you now get them from XRP to Thai baht or South African rand or whatever it is, and it's then your issue to deal with the other end. So Calvin's asked, maybe Matt H could explain how ILP works in general and how XRP plays with ILP. That's a whole big topic, and I'm kind of coming up to the end, and I probably want to cover that in a video on its own. I also want to look at it a bit more myself, because I have to admit I've not looked into ILP as much as I would really like to. The general concept of ILP, in very high level terms, is it is a mechanism for transferring value between different ledgers or blockchains. So Ripple's X-Current payment system that I talked right at the start of this video is based on ILP. So it allows the ledger in a bank in the UK to transfer value to a ledger in a bank in Japan, right? And ILP is the connector between the two that says, okay, if I make a payment here, do you receive it? And once you receive it, I can confirm it and I can remove it from this side. And you don't, you have what's called an atomic payment. You don't have a situation where something fails halfway and you've kind of sent the money but it hasn't arrived, or the money's arrived but hasn't been sent, or whatever. So ILP ensures the integrity of that connection all the way through. And it can work between traditional ledgers, it can work between cryptocurrencies. There was a demo in the early days of ILP. I mean, this must have been about a year ago now. They did a demo in which they went across, I think, 7 different cryptocurrencies. So they sent a payment and it went, I can't remember, XRP to Ether to Bitcoin to Monero to da 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 da. And I believe it went across about 7 different cryptocurrencies and came out the other end. So ILP kind of gives you this currency agnostic way of moving value around. So in the end, it should be a case of it doesn't really matter what cryptocurrency you're using. You can use any of them. So again, it begs the question, why XRP? Well, XRP is still the fastest. It's still the cheapest. So, it's still the one with the most adoption in this kind of space. There's some other currencies out there that look technically quite, adept, like Digibyte, but, no exchanges stock Digibyte in comparison to XRP. There's 200 different exchanges that have XRP on at the moment. And quite a lot of them, about 70 of them, have XRP to fiat pairings, I believe. So, XRP really is that much further ahead than so many other currencies in this case. Will something else come along that's better? Maybe. And if it does, it does. But again, that could be the benefit of ILP, that gives you that slight level of abstraction. And that's why they stopped Codius, the development of Codius, the smart contract platform that Ripple were working on, until they finished ILP and then brought Codius back again. Because then that meant that Codius could actually be paid, the Codius host could be paid via ILP, which means it could be paid via any currency. It doesn't just have to be XRP, it could be any other currency at all. If you've got an ILP connector from the Bitcoin Lightning Network, you could pay via that. Just again, XRP is the fastest and the cheapest, so it's kind of the better way. But again, it comes down to a lot of the mentality that the XRP Ledger developers, the Ripple developers, Coil developers have, which is the best technology should win. Nothing should be winning by tilting the playing field. It should be winning because it's the best technology. And that's what, we seem to be seeing slowly happening, this slow build up, and hopefully should accelerate to a further crescendo towards the end of this year, hopefully. Crypto Hippie says, on the 40 years, 60% savings over X-Current. That's the real carrot, even if more cost savings. Yes. So there was a study, I think it was a study by SBI themselves, that was, if you used X-Current, you save a certain amount, I think 30% over doing traditional payment. If you use X-Rapid as well, you get, I think it's a further 60% or so, 60% total, I can't remember the exact figure, saving. And that's because you're not having to deal with the correspondent banking fees. At the moment, I think the current average price to send a remittance worldwide at the moment, if you look at all the remittances going worldwide between all the different countries, all the Western Unions, MoneyGrams, all the different banks sending currency backwards and forwards, I think the figure is something like about, it costs 7% of the transaction fee. 7% of the payment is a transaction fee. So if you send $100, it will cost you $7 to do that on average. A Ripple want to bring that right down. Ripple want to bring that down to the cents, and that's going to just make such a difference with how transactions happen worldwide and the kind of businesses that could even be facilitated. At the moment, if you have to pay such a high fee, I mean, even at the moment with, say, a debit card or credit card, if you want to make a payment, your payment processor, I think, will charge about 30 pence, 30 cents, 30 euro cents per transaction. Well, that means that you can't make a payment less than what, €5, $5, £5, without it the fee becoming, too expensive relative to the cost of the payment. So when we get this fee right down on payments, then suddenly it's a case of you don't have to spend £5, but you could spend 5 pence. You could buy, somebody joked about having a beer pump that you actually paid per milliliter of beer. You just put your glass underneath, pull the pump, and it meters it as the beer comes out, and you literally pay per milliliter. Kind of a contrived example, but that's what a fun way of demonstrating what you could do with payments with cryptocurrencies and with things like XRP and the payment channels and stuff, and even possibly ILP with that as well. So we're coming up to the end of an hour. I'm going to start wrapping it up. So a few more questions. So Stuart asks, if Bank A wants to give Bank B money by XRapid, they both have to be running the software. So if Bank 1 goes live with it this year, then XRapid, surely it has to be more than one bank. Yeah, yes. That would make sense. And you've seen a number of press releases from Ripple in the past about partnerships between things like Standard Chartered in Singapore and Axis Bank in India, working together. So that's talking about XCurrent, but that could be XRapid as well. And you could be talking about people like MAS, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, the central kind of money authority within Singapore, for instance, and looking at things like XRP as well. So there's, using XRapid, yes, it does mean you need more than one bank in order to get it to work. But think about it. Once you've got the two banks, to add a third is easy. And that third can communicate with the two banks that are already there. You add a fourth bank, they just have to implement XRapid and they can work with the other three banks. You suddenly get these network effects. And this is why I personally believe once this starts to take off, it's going to go fast. I think it's really going to take off fast. Once, we get past this kind of initial bootstrapping kind of hurdle of liquidity and start building up this payment volume, I think it's going to go really quite quickly once it starts to build up, and more and more banks start using it, because it's going to become the case of, well, why wouldn't you implement XRapid? Because suddenly you implement XRapid as one bank and you have access to, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of banks worldwide just by doing that, and that's then just going to be, no brainer. So. Great. Well, I'm going to wrap it up now. So thank you very much for tuning in. And if you like this, like the video, subscribe. Yes, I'm a YouTuber now. I've got to beg for your subscriptions and likes. But there is a good reason for it, is that if I get enough subscribers, I can actually change the channel name to something meaningful. One of the Twitter users before the call said, what do I need to search for on my smart TV? And I can't just say look for Cryptocurrency Explained, because that's not the name of the channel, because I can't rename the channel until I get a certain number of subscribers. So please, it would mean a lot if you enjoy the channel, then please subscribe. And yes, any further questions, then put them in the comments and I'll answer them in the comments, or grab me on Twitter. So fantastic. Thank you very much, and I'll see you same time next week. Good night.